Hey guys, it's been a while, so I figured I'd get this series started up again. So, here we are dealing with Erich von Daniken once again, and this time we're on chapter 4. It took me a fair amount of time to get through this, and admittedly it kind of went in the back burner a bit, but we're back. So chapter 4, hope you're all prepared. Oh, intro.
It's a fucking intro. It's a fucking intro. I'm doing this temporarily until I get a new intro scene. It's a fucking intro. It's a fucking intro. It's a fucking intro. Now on for the main show.
So, chapter 4. Was God an astronaut? Scripts here, by the way, so I'll be going back to it in 4. Well folks, get ready to pick your jaws up off the flare. We begin with a statement that the Bible is full of secrets and information. It's all very well and good until you realise that he's going to use this as evidence that throughout this chapter God was an alien. Yeah. For starters, he claims that Genesis starts with the creation of the earth and then says it's reported that with absolute geological accuracy. Note that. Absolute geological accuracy. He then asks how the chroniclers would have known that minerals preceded plants and plants preceded animals. A simple answer for his simple mind: that the Bible is accurate in this, so aliens must have told the writers. That's his answer. Aliens told the writers. Of course, Erich does fail to take into account that the Bible also states that light came before the sun, that light was merged with darkness somehow, night and day were created before the sun as well, also that there was lots of water above the firmament, which is heaven, as well as on the earth. It also states that land masses were completely submerged, so that our planet was a water planet when it was formed, as opposed to being a molten rock when it was formed, which water would have just boiled away into nothing. It also states that grasses were the first foliage, and after the plants came the sun, the moon, and that the moon is a light. That's all that the Bible states, by the way, and according to Erich, that's geologically accurate. Which is not true, because even in 1968, when this was written, this was not a factual thing. And then we get our another sort of quote from the Genesis, which is, "And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness." He then asks why God speaks in plurals instead of singular, especially as Judaism, Christianity and Islam, all being 3 branches of the one religion, all have a singular God. He ignores the fact that there's significant evidence in the Bible itself, as well as in written records at the time, that Judaism was a polytheistic religion. It didn't have one God to begin with. And there's a lot of thinking that Judaism as of today was one cult, the cult of Yahweh, which eventually slowly wiped out the rest of the cults and took over. So, and like I said, there are other gods mentioned in the Bible as if they're real as well. So you know, it's not like there's only one God and that's it. In the Bible it quite clearly states that there are several gods at the time. Then we get another quote from Genesis, book 6 this time, stating, "And it came to pass when the men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and the daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw daughters of men, and that they were fair. And they took them wives of all which they chose." Again, Erich uses this particular passage to point out that God is singular in Judaism. So where did all these sons of God come from? He hints that the sons of God are aliens, by the way. The answer is simple. Judaism, like I say, was a polytheistic thing. And eventually it became monotheistic. And like I say, some people think that the cult of Yahweh possibly started up to be big when Moses was told God's name on Mount Sinai. You know, that sort of thing. Indeed, this form of argument carries on with Erich quoting Genesis 6:4. "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The men became mighty men which were of old, men of renown." He points out there is another mention of sons of God, hardly a surprise when the last quote was all of 2 verses ago in the Bible. However, he also notes that this is the first mention of giants in the Bible. Now, he goes on to state how giants pop up in mythological stories from around the globe, and because of this he concludes that giants must have existed. Yeah, that's his evidence. Giants existed because it's in multiple stories from around the world. Not because we found evidence that giants exist in the world, because we haven't. No. That's because they exist in stories. I should really tell you all about how Erich's mind works. It's infantile, it really is. So after Erich states that they must have existed, he goes on to ask what sort of creatures they were. He asks if they were our forefathers who built the gigantic buildings and effortlessly manhandled the monoliths, despite us having evidence of how they were made. Well, it doesn't state what gigantic buildings were supposedly built by these giants, or which monoliths. I'm going to presume he means Stonehenge and the pyramids. You know, stuff that we've got drawings of. Well, in the case of the pyramids we have drawings and hieroglyphs of how they were made. And in the case of the Stonehenge, we've kind of come close to figuring out how that was made. There's been multiple hypotheses on it. On it. Though he doesn't state, like I say, what gigantic buildings there are, he does ask if these giants were technically skilled space travellers from another star. I could forgive Erich here for getting stars and planets mixed up, because stars are from a different solar system. If it's not for the fact he did it earlier in the book, and he meant planet at that time. So here he means planet again, not stars and solar system, but he means planet. So, repetition, like I say, leads me to think that Erich honestly is confusing stars as planets. Erich then states one last thing in the paragraph that we're on, which is, one thing is clear. The Bible speaks of giants, and these giants were the sons of God, and these sons of God were giants. It states that giants lived at a time when the sons of God did their bow chicka wow wow with the daughters of man. Indeed, the Bible states that giants lived on the earth after the sons of God were finished doing the dirty. The question to ask here is, how did giants survive the flood? Which is the next thing to follow Genesis 6:4. And after all, if dinosaurs are too big for the ark, then surely giants are too. So, after all this from Erich, and that's the introductory paragraph, by the way, we got onto the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and how Erich thinks it proves aliens. For starters, apparently the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is a very exciting and detailed account of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. See, Erich goes on to explain how two angels came to Sodom when Father Lot was near the town gate. That's what he calls him, Father Lot. Lot was expecting these two angels, who proved to be men because he recognized them at once and offered them hospitality. All pretty much standard within the biblical story so far, you know. Lot then pleads with the two men to come straight to his house instead of doing their job. But however, Erich does go off script from the biblical story. He then says that the men of the town came to know them, but the two angels were able to dispel the lust of the local playboy's sexual desire. Now, in the Bible it actually states that the townsfolk came to know of the two men who had been tasked with destroying the city if they couldn't find 50 good men. It says nothing about the two men dispelling their lust, though it does state that Lot lied about his daughters, saying that they were virgins, and he offered them up for rape, gang rape, to the men of the town instead of let them have the two men who were there to destroy the town. So Erich, like I say, goes off, and he attributes off script. Sorry, where am I? Yes. So apparently these two men dispelled the lust within the crowd, according to Lot. According to Erich, sorry. Now Erich also goes off biblical script and attributes sons with daughters-in-laws to Lot. Now the biblical story mentions nothing about sons, about Lot having sons with daughters-in-law. So, you know, married sons. It does state, however, that Lot and his two daughters were married and had sons-in-laws. And he has sons-in-laws even. So yeah. The reason I bring up this small point is that Erich has taken liberties with a book that is so well known to spread his lies, then how can anyone trust what he says full stop? He goes on to quote Genesis some more, just so he can point out that the two men had strange powers. He goes on to state that the main agency in getting Lot out was speed. He can't imagine God being tied down to a timetable, so why the rush? He also takes pains to point out that Lot didn't have the utmost respect for him because he raised some objections, so the men just state that he doesn't go and then he's doomed. Erich also asks what really happened at Sodom. Was the destruction of the city by some power or fixed to the very minute? Had the countdown already begun and did the angels know it? According to Erich, if that was the case, then the destruction would have been imminent. He asked if there was a simple way to bring Lot's family to safety and asked why they had to go into the mountains at all costs and why they weren't allowed to look around. I will get into that. Before I go into Erich's whole reasoning here, I want to address a couple of things. For us to find out what happened at Sodom and Gomorrah, no, he does seem to forget that Gomorrah existed, is we'd have to find them first. We haven't. We've found no evidence they existed at any point. You see, like I said, we've never found any existence for them outside the Bible. Not in any contemporary writings from other cultures, nothing. So this whole conjecture is shite, as Erich is taking it for factual occurrence, not possible occurrence. Now, on to Erich's reasoning, shall we? And this is where it gets a bit daft. Erich thinks that Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed not by fire and brimstone, but by an atomic blast because aliens want to get rid of some dangerous fissionable material. Yeah, aliens want to get rid of something that was dangerously fissionable, so they created an atomic blast which would leave radiation for thousands of years in the area. Bravo, aliens of Erich's mind. Fucking genius, eh? So, apparently the reason that Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt, by the way, is because she turned round and looked at an atomic sun. Yeah! Apparently, looking at an atomic explosion is enough to kill you on the spot, and turn you into a pillar of salt. Also, being a few miles away in a mountain cave apparently somehow negates all the fallout and the radiation of the blast required to destroy two cities without a trace. And yeah, taking aside the problem of not being able to find Sodom or Gomorrah, the level of force required to utterly wipe out all traces of two cities is pretty immense. For a nuclear explosion of that force and size would have left indicators. However, there are none whatsoever. Lot and his daughters go on to get freaky in a cave, that's within, being generous, a day's running distance from the explosion. It's just not possible for them to be unharmed by this point. If they are trying to run, and they are only in the fields surrounding the city at the time that his wife turns around and looks around, and dies, and according to Erich's explanation, that means there's an atomic blast going off behind them, then they haven't got time to run. The fallout would be falling around them by the time they reach the mountains. But hey, explosions, reasons, who knows. So, anyway, apparently it is credulous beyond belief to believe that an omnipotent and omnibenevolent God outside the realms of space and time would do this. So it must be aliens. Must be. He goes on about this by quoting Ezekiel, talking about his time in captivity to the Babylonians. Apparently Ezekiel spotted 4 living beings come from the heavens with fire and all sorts of other special effects that would probably Hollywood quite easily give to Michael Bay to do, and there'd be more explosions than there should be. You get the story. Anyway, this must be aliens according to Erich. Because God is everywhere and thus doesn't need fancy entrances like this, despite, you know, God having propensity for having fancy entrances everywhere. He goes by Ezekiel's descriptions of an amphibious helicopter somehow. In the desert! Amazing! Off you bright these aliens, eh? So anyway, amphibious helicopter of some sort. The thing is, Erich automatically assumes that this isn't some sort of fever dream, or lies, you know. No, it's all true and perfectly and a perfect description of the vehicle of some sort. So let's hear this perfect description, shall we? The creatures had the likeness of man, each one with 4 faces and 4 wings, with straight feet whose soles were shaped like calves. They shone like burnished brass. That's apparently a description of the vehicle. Even if it was a vehicle, brass doesn't make the greatest of interstellar materials. Why not steel, which is a lot harder than brass? Steel is a far more suitable material for creating, you know, space-going vehicles, or helicopters. Seeing as steel was known to have been around some 4,000 years ago, it wouldn't be hard for Ezekiel to describe it. Now, Ezekiel doesn't make much sense when he starts going on about wheels, but to Erich it suits him fine, as joined with the noise that Ezekiel reports, it automatically means helicopter of some sort. Now, Ezekiel goes on about wheels within wheels within wheels, which doesn't sound like a helicopter to me. Now, Ezekiel's not the best book to be going on it anyway, as there's evidence that it was tampered with over the centuries. Bits added and removed, like all of the Old Testament and New Testament stories, to be honest. So, not the best, to be honest. But according to Erich, Ezekiel was an eyewitness because reasons. Apparently Ezekiel was taken around the country in this vehicle and told many things, such as laws and rules for a proper civilization. Now, bear in mind that when Erich claims that the beings who imparted all his knowledge on Ezekiel were not gods but aliens, he automatically assumes that living beings equal vehicles, with only the shittiest of reasons. Also, he seems to assume that the ancient Jews had a prim and proper society because of these aliens, and that we humans can't think up laws for ourselves. Plus, Ezekiel was a dick. I mean, assuming that other countries fall under the same laws as the ones that Judaism created because his people were chosen people, and Yahweh was the one true God, don't you know? He was a bit of a dick. He also heavily influenced Leviticus, which contains laws like banning the non-use of salt in offerings to God, banning the eating of fat, banning carelessly making oaths, banning letting your hair become unkempt, banning any seafood without scales in them, or fins. It's also against the law to have sex with your daughter-in-law. I don't see why. Go to church 33 days after having a boy, or 66 if you have a girl. I wouldn't count Judaism as being the greatest and most amazing civilization ever based on Ezekiel, and what follows Ezekiel. Now, he also then goes on to talk about building of the Ark of the Covenant. He thinks that Moses gave the exact measurements to the inch, despite inches only being discovered, well, being made up later. But, you know, imperial measurements weren't around in ancient times. Moses gave cubits. He seems to find it amazing that Moses would know the dimensions of the Ark, despite Moses being the one to design it. This is probably one of the most ludicrous leaps of logic, and I do hesitate to use the word logic there, that Erich has. Because it would be a fairly basic thing for someone to design something and know the dimensions. If you design something and don't know your own dimensions, you're not that great a designer. However, Moses claims God told him to build it, and how for a designer not to know the extra dimensions, it would be ridiculous. However, Erich isn't done with daftness. No. Apparently it's of alien construct because Uzzah in 2 Samuel something or touched it and died without wearing the proper clothing. So because of this description of Uzzah dying, the Ark is electrified with enough volts to kill, according to Erich. Now, even better than that, Erich says if we remade the Ark according to the instructions of Moses, we found the recreation creating several hundred volts. Now, I've read these instructions on how to build it. It's in the Bible. And I can find nothing in them that would create an electrical charge. You know? Bear in mind, it's a recreation wouldn't have whatever was in the box of acacia wood and gold and like. It wouldn't be in the Ark. We'd just be going by the biblical technical description of the Ark, i.e. recreating it as we see it here. And this is what Erich is working on. He's only working on what we're told in the Bible. So, look at what's told in the Bible. First, we make the box of acacia wood. Now, wood isn't known for being the greatest conductor of electricity. In fact, it's not a conductor, it's an insulator. It's the worst thing you could choose, really. It's one of the worst things you could choose for conducting an electrical charge. Then the tabernacle is made of linen and yarn. Again, not material known for holding much of an electrical charge or conducting it. Then we go to something that is amazing at conducting electricity. Gold. Yeah, gold, at last. A conductor, but no mention of what creates the electrical charge as yet. We've only had one thing that conducts. Then we have a tented goat here next, so nothing electrical there. Then these are held together by another metal, which is bronze. Now bronze does conduct pretty well, but it's not too good at it. Again, nothing mentioned so far that would create enough electricity to kill, just things that conduct electricity. So, ram skin is the next material, and again, neither creates nor conducts electricity well. Silver is the next thing mentioned, and that's fantastic for conducting electricity, but like I say, and I'm going to repeat this over and over, without a source for that electricity, it's just shiny and pretty, and that's all. We need a source for an electrical charge to be made. After that, the Bible goes on to describe the altar for burnt offerings. At no point is any electrical generator mentioned, but according to Erich, it's producing enough electricity to kill a human because, in his memory, and in the biblical story, it's described as always being covered in sparks. Now, remember folks, it takes around 6,000 to 60,000 volts for a defibrillator to get your heart started again if it ever stops. Lethality in from an electric charge is around 1000 volts upwards, depending on how strong your heart is, to withstand the voltage. People have survived being struck with lightning, which is in the millions of volts. In fact, I've seen a video of someone getting struck twice by lightning while walking down the street in rain. They got knocked down, eventually got up after about 2 minutes, walked on a little bit further and got hit again, leaving black scorch marks on the ground, and they got up the second time as well, by the way. They were okay. Well, they were generally okay, as you would be from getting struck by lightning. Right, but this doesn't deter Erich, however, who goes on to say that it has amazing similarities to the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, he finds it odd that the Torah, or the Bible, the Torah in this case, would be the Cape, since it's Old Testament, holds the same stories as the Sumerian one, which is older. Now, I don't tend to find it odd that one myth of a culture copies an older myth from a culture that was in the same area. But hey, apparently it's odd. See, according to Erich, every ancient religious book holds similarities to each other, so this must mean aliens. That similarity apparently convinces him that the gods tend to hide from humans, and they are aliens. He asks if the story of Exodus comes from the Epic of Gilgamesh, and then states that it's impossible as Moses was raised in ancient Egypt. Erich, to be fair, is not the only one to believe that the Jews were slaves in Egypt. It's only recently that the story is slowly becoming seen as bullshit, due to lack of any evidence that there was an exodus from Egypt, or even that there were Jewish slaves in Egypt. Right. Erich then goes on to suggest that we query the timing of the Old Testament because the story of David fighting Goliath. Yeah, apparently the timing of the Testament, it should be questioned, Old Testament should be questioned because of the David and Goliath story. Now, I've no idea why this should be, because he doesn't state why it should be questioned. He just goes on to suggest that all ancient stories were collated into one spot and then disseminated to different peoples in the form of copies. He adds that the Dead Sea Scrolls are evidence of this because they contain an amplification of the Genesis story. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls were a fantastic find historically. Okay? A fantastic look into a religion and its history. But they do prove nothing. They are not evidence to be used to prove anything. They are thought to range from 430 BCE to about 360 CE. It's also known that they contain non-canonical books that were not included in the Torah during the Second Temple era of Judaism. It is more likely that these were the scripts from a splinter sect of Judaism that hid them to keep them safe. Now, Erich goes on to state that there are mentions of chariots, wheels and smoke in the books. Considering that these texts include non-canonical as well as canonical stuff, it isn't too surprising that the stories are similar, to be honest, with slight differences. But apparently in the Moses Apocalypse, Eve looks up and sees a chariot of light in the sky. Now that is mentioned in the story, it is true. But Erich, instead of thinking that chariots were the height of transport technology at the time, and thus they were fitting allegorical devices, presumes that it means aliens. He also goes on to mention that in the story proclaims that no mortal man could describe it. And to me, that sounds like the storyteller got lazy, to be honest. I mean, it's easy enough to describe something fantastical, but to say that no man could describe it, yeah, pretty dull storytelling. Erich then goes on to recount the tale of Lamech from the Lamech scroll that he admits is barely legible. And somehow in this story it's that Noah was not only accepted as Lamech's child, because Enoch was forewarned by the flood. Sorry, no, I tell you like that. Noah was only accepted as Lamech's child because Enoch was foretold of the flood. Erich presumes that this forewarning is from aliens. Erich then concludes that this forewarning shows that humans are an artificial breeding experiment by unknown beings in outer space. Otherwise, the story of the Bible the story in the Bible of constant fertilization by giants and sons of heaven are just too ridiculous and pointless. Also, the flood is apparently historically proven by Erich, though if it was, that's news to every actual historian out there and every geologist and scientist. Since it was planned ahead of time, it is no longer divine judgment, but aliens. Yeah. Aliens bred us, and then they kill us because experiment, and then they breed us again. Yeah. Now the next bit of fantasy from Erich to come along in this chapter starts with him saying that its possibility of breeding an intelligent human race is no longer an absurd theory. All because of some old religious story crap about the gods of varying religions creating humans. Erich seems to think that we can create intelligent humans ourselves and breed an intelligent human race ourselves from petri dishes, I guess. Erich forgets that religious stories come first from the first attempts to understand what was going on around us. It was the first attempt to explain naturalistic issues. So we didn't evolve according to Erich. We were artificially created and we are an experiment. Yeah, take that, ego. You're just an experiment. Though Erich does start to question why the gods would ask for offerings and sacrifices of any kind, Erich thinks that the aliens were after materials and the like. He also goes on to say that the city of Ezion Geber in the Gulf of Aqaba had an ultra-modern foundry with air channels. Now, I have no idea where Erich gets this information, as I can find no mention of this foundry in reliable sources. It was a major seaport with a copper refinery in ancient times, and was founded by King Solomon, but that's about all I can get. Erich thinks that the city is prehistoric, despite only being founded circa 950 BCE. And he also thinks that the modern historians are stumped over how copper could be refined in the city. Never mind that there's evidence that we were both cold and hot refining copper 7,000 years ago. This refinery stumps us apparently. We couldn't possibly refine copper in a foundry 2,964 years ago. This refinery stumps us. No, yeah, completely. Erich does find it impossible that the copper refining can be found, evidence of copper refining can be found in the caves around the area that were dated to about 5,000 years ago. Remember, Erich in his previous chapter thinks the Sumerians have been around for over 100,000 years. And I guess he thinks that no one could learn to forge copper in that time. Erich really does not like the idea of our ancestors being smart. Erich once again presumes that if we are seen in our space travels in the future by primitive peoples, we'll all be seen as the sons of heaven or gods. But he then ends the chapter by saying it'd be great if we were far superior to people that we find in our space travels, but it'd be a major disappointment if we were found to be thick as shit when we encounter other aliens because we are technologically behind. Like I said, folks, this chapter was some time in the making. I'd written up half the script beforehand, way back in October last year. I put it aside because, quite simply, the Sodom and Gomorrah stuff got to me. I did have to bludgeon my head several times against a brick wall, just so I could understand Erich's drivel. You know, I had to get brains leaking out my ears first. So yeah, that's chapter 4. Join me next time for chapter 5, which is called Fiery Chariots from the Heavens. Yeah, fiery chariots from the heavens. So looking forward to doing that script. See ya.